Okay, once again, welcome to the first messy conversation of the winter quarter of the year 2025, which is, at least here in Southern California, has started off with a bang, so to speak. Um, we're very conscious of, as an Angelino myself, we're very conscious of the struggles that everyone in Los Angeles is going through. I don't think there's anybody here who hasn't been touched by the fires, the evacuations, the loss of lives. Um, and so I wanted to start actually today, before we get started with two quotations that are connected to this current moment in Los Angeles. The first is a quotation from Joan Didion. And then I'm going to bookend that with a quotation from Audre Lorde. Um, here's Joan Didion. It's hard for people who have not lived in Los Angeles to realize how radically the Santa Ana figures in the local imagination. The city burning is Los Angeles's deepest image of itself. Los Angeles' weather is the weather of catastrophe, of apocalypse. And just as the reliably long and bitter winters of New England determine the way life is lived there, so the violence and unpredictability of the Santa Ana affect the entire quality of life in Los Angeles, accentuate its impermanence, its vulnerability. The wind shows us how close to the edge we are. And if that's at all an accurate description of life here in Los Angeles, bookend that with Audre Lorde, who reminds us that we have to we have to consciously study how to be tender with each other until it becomes a habit. Because what was native has been stolen from us, but we can practice being gentle with each other by being gentle with that piece of ourselves that is hardest to hold. Again, welcome to Messy Conversations. We're excited to have James Joyce III joining us today for a messy conversation devoted to coffee with a black guy. And we've got a panel of students who will be engaging directly with James here momentarily. A reminder that we won't have a messy conversation next Monday because of the ML King Jr. holiday. We will return on the 27th with a messy conversation on mutual aid organizations. Seemed like an appropriate time to be having that kind of a conversation. So we hope to see you all back here on the 27th. We also have February, the month of February will be Black History Month, and we have a series of terrific messy conversations devoted to Black History Month. So with that, I want to get out of the way, remind you quickly to keep yourself muted until called on to join the conversation. And if you want to join the conversation, either raise your hand electronically, put your question or comment in the chat, and we'll get to you in the second half of our time together today. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to our MC for today, Clarence R. Williams.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, brother, brother,
25, it's going to be a black male in a white t-shirt.
there's far too many of you dying.
14 million more
You
Americans
know
would be
we've got to
uninsured
find
next
a
year.
way
This deadly mass shooting
to
happened
bring
in
some
Parkland, Florida,
loving
at
here
Martin
today. Yeah. escalate. You see, war is not the answer, for only love can conquer hate. You know we've got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Picket lines and picket signs, don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me so you can see what's going on. What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? Oh, what's going on? Right on. Right on. Right on. Everybody thinks we're at home. Oh, but who are they to judge us? Simply cause our hair is long. Oh, you know that we've got to find a way. Bring some understanding here today. Picket line and picket signs, don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me so you can see what's going on. Yeah, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. I'll tell you what's going on. Ooh.
Okay, I'm unmuted. What's going on? It's 2025. So I'm Clarence R. Williams. I am the student representative of the Messy Conversation planning team. I'd like to welcome you guys joining us today around our theme, Coffee with a Black Guy. And before I introduce you to the Black Guy, I'd like to introduce you to my cohort. This is one of the first student-led Messies we've had in a very long time. So I'm happy that they are joining us, and I would like each of them to introduce themselves to you as we begin Coffee with a Black Guy. Chandler, would you like to start us?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Chandler Gertis. I am coming to you from the Antioch, Seattle, and I'm just real happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Javon. I am a student here at Antioch in the graduate program in Seattle, Washington. And same, I'm happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Munoz. I am from the Los Angeles campus, and I'm in the undergraduate program in psychology. And I'm very happy to be here as well.
Thank you, guys. So, Coffee with the Black Guy, we really do have a Black guy who has coffee today. But Coffee with the Black Guy is actually a social justice centered forum that has come about globally, actually. But I want to just say it's more than just a forum, it's actually a movement. And I'm happy to introduce you to its founder and chief visionary officer, and that is Mr. James Joyce III. I invite you all to check out our website, which has now been launched, for further information on not only my cohort, but of course, Mr. Joyce, for a deeper dive on everything he's been doing, as well as his organization. Mr. Joyce is not only the founder of the movement Coffee with a Black Guy, but he's also a writer, a lecturer, a counselor, a consultant, He wears multiple hats. He's also been a journalist, and he's been a major, major, major force in California political arena. So, without much, much further ado, please meet Mr. James Joyce III, our esteemed conversationist today.
Wow. Thank you, Clarence. Thank you all for assembling. Clarence, you really know how to hype it. Look, we're just having a conversation. Sometimes it gets messy, sometimes it gets clean, right? And at the end of the day, we all do it with love. And so I want to kind of take the temperature down, the expectations down. We're just having conversations with the intention of getting a little messy.
Why did you send me that Cash App a few minutes ago to say those things then?
Right? Exactly. Right. Well, you say the check is in the mail. Thank you. Thank you. No, I mean, I greatly appreciate you all having me and being in conversation with you all. I appreciate the work that you all have been doing with this forum. It's exactly what Coffee with the Black Guy is and why it started. Essentially, people just aren't having conversations that they need to be having. We as our human nature tends to bring us towards comfortability. And because of that, we don't go towards the things that are difficult. And our country, our communities, our families would be much better served, I believe, if we headed towards that discomfort and in an intentional and developmental way. And that was essentially the catalyst behind Coffee with the Black Guy, why I started it. Essentially, Black Guy Office Hours is what it started as. It's now my consulting company, the name of my consulting business that I do work with organizations and individuals on various issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's had an evolution, but at the root of it, it is all just about having and engaging in authentic conversations. And I'm just one Black guy who happens to have some information and some experience, but I do not have all the answers. I believe in the power of community, and so as questions come up, I have answers. Other folks do as well, and that's why it's really rooted in conversation. So, a great pleasure to be here. And I would be remiss if I too did not, David, thank you for getting us started off with the remembrance of the realities of our world, because that one statement in that first passage, the wind shows us how close to the edge we are. And we heard it back in the 80s about don't push us because we're close to the edge, right? I think that there is something very real about that edge of dysfunction, that edge of vision, that edge of creation, that the wind can remind us of. And if you do see me occasionally looking at my phone, it is the wind outside that is causing me to stay tethered to the emergency alerts and things, because I'm very aware of our reality. So again, thank you all for having me, and I look forward to engaging in good conversation.
Well, thank you. And, because Messy Conversations origin story is very similar to yours, what was the actual incident that prompted you to start Coffee with a Black Guy?
The incident that caused me to launch it was the summer of 2016 when we had Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. Those instances, I had the domain name and cooked the idea a year in advance. I just was sitting on it. And then when those events happened, it was like, okay, look, I've been working in politics. I was the district director for the state senator at the time in the Santa Barbara area, and engaging in various conversations in various rooms. And people in Santa Barbara tend to be very engaging, right? They talk about the issues of the day. They talk about like the topics that are the headlines. But when Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were the headlines, they weren't making eye contact with me. They weren't engaging in these same conversations. And I thought that to be quite inauthentic and something that was a disservice to us as community. And so I just decided, like, okay, I've heard about Coffee with a Cop. had an argument with a fraternity brother that it started in his city, and he was the assistant city manager down in Hawthorne. And I vehemently argued that no, he was wrong. It's everywhere, and he was right. After I did my research, that it did start. Coffee with the Cop started in Hawthorne, California, in 2011. And the law enforcement started it around the idea of wanting to humanize the badge and destigmify that uniform that they wear. And there was something about that message for me that resonated about. I wanted people to see me for who I am, not just the Black 6'4" figure that walks down the street, right? And so, is there a way that we can break that barrier? And it's just conversation, authentic conversation, and really engage in contact with other folks.
Well, you've certainly been very successful with it. We've bared witness on YouTube, and I invite our audience to certainly go to YouTube or to your website, which is also posted, to experience some of your past forums. But I just want to just take a quick moment to thank our illustrious former team member who brought you to us, Dr. Anna Wong, who is there in Santa Barbara with you. And often I've in the past teased her, and also some of our other guests from Santa Barbara, that, I didn't know that there were more than 7 Black people in Santa Barbara. So I just want to know, how effective has your forum been in Santa Barbara to bring out more of the population to coalesce?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the population of Santa Barbara is definitely the Black population of Santa Barbara is definitely less than it used to be, but it hovers around 2.3, 2.1%, right, and countywide, more or less, right. And so when you're thinking about what kind of an impact can you have, what I realized after actually speaking at a graduate class at the UCSB was that the work that I was doing is backed by something called contact theory. The more contact you have with the other, it's a psychological theory of study of saying the more contact that you have with the other, the less other they become, right? And so that was what the concept was, is that the folks, white folks, brown folks in Santa Barbara were not engaging in these conversations. And so I just decided to lean into the thing that I'm most comfortable in, and that's my skin. And so being unapologetically who I am, a Black man, leaning into that, knowing that there's no escaping that reality, and opening myself and allowing that to be part of the instructor. And being that, I'm not a California born and bred. I was born and raised in Maryland, right outside of the Baltimore County area, in a place called Carroll County, predominantly white community, where I did this in kindergarten, a lot more aggressively, a lot less articulate, but still engaging with the other in a way that was quite difficult for me. Doing that throughout schooling, throughout the community, playing on soccer teams, all of these various things in the community. And so that is part of what this is that I've kind of always done it anyway. And when issues were to come up in the community, often my friends of various backgrounds reach out and want to talk anyway, right? And I'm like, look, I got a job. The senator needs this, that, or the other. And so then the concept of scheduling a time when we can actually have that conversation instead of picking up my phone every time it rings, that resonated quite a bit with me. Audio. It's easy to do.
Sorry, I didn't realize I'd muted myself. But you mentioned othering, and a lot of your work, your professional work as a consultant, is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've had a couple of forums, here at Antioch, in Messy Conversations on DEI. So moving forward beyond January 20th, with all of the book banning, with all of the erasures going on, and all of the corporations and the institutions that have been forced to drop their DEI programs, How do you see your work in DEI going forward?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a quite a time of uncertainty, you know, it's got me nervous, right? You know, but contracts are scaling down, if not disappearing, for both myself and colleagues that do this work. For me, my mindset has always been, you know, I remember sitting on um, advisory committees in my journalism days, right? In the newsroom, the ethics committee, diversity and tolerance. We were just being tolerated then committee. And, you know, the language changes, there's an ebb and flow to that, but the work doesn't. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion by what Shakespeare say? A rose by any other name, a rose by any other name is still a rose. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is nothing more than organizational development. It's nothing more than individual development. You can put a variety of various colloquial names on it, but ultimately it's being a better human, and that work will not go away. We have to be a little bit more creative about how we get in the door, potentially. But again, the work needs to continue, I'm committed to continuing to do that work.
Well, thank you for that. I want to invite any of my cohort members to jump in at any time. But James, on that note, when you speak of, you know, what the new landscape, as I will say, will look like in the DEI arena, you know, I always say personally that if the systems were different, if the systems were not solely built on white supremacy, there would be no need for DEI, in my own opinion. What say you, my cohort? Chandler, would you like to chime in?
I mean, I don't think I can disagree with you there, Clarence. If these systems weren't built on a certain structure that benefits one group and at the detriment of all others, then we wouldn't need this diversity, equity, inclusion. These things are here so that we can more democratize the workplace, as it were, for using lack of any better language, getting people that actually exist into where they can be. I, I, I'm with you. I struggle with the looking at the world and then without history and the context of where we are. I don't think it would be something we need, but it is absolutely because of our context, our histories. Groups of people are in need of uplifting. And I think we need to come together in order for us to lift each other up because currently the system wants to go a different direction. And that's the direction of nationalism and profit. And I think the only real thing that can combat that is community and togetherness. So I want to ask James, especially after the recent voting turnout in November, there was a lot of hubbub and a lot of finger pointing within a couple of the different communities, BIPOC and other, like, oh, this community voted this way. We can't be working with them anymore. Or this community voted this way. Obviously, they don't think about how Black people feel about this. It's Latinos, it's Indigenous people. How do we combat that narrative that we are separate groups looking for something when we're all genuinely and generally looking for the same thing, community, and to lift each other up?
Thank you for that, Chandler. But I really think your answer is in your question, because the one thing that those groups that everyone's pointing fingers at have in common is they voted. The reason we have the problem that we have is because of the people who didn't, not because of the people who did. And so there is a large swath of the eligible voters. I believe there was a number of 32% or so that chose not to vote. That's the problem. right? There's the problem of non-participation, that apathy, that my vote doesn't count. Although I agree with that statement that your vote doesn't count individually, I think individualism is part of that problem as well, right? Everybody thinks that they are the answer or their vote is what counts, but no, it's about your ability to connect with, as you said, Chandler, community, and then allow that to be a voting block, right? And so I have no beef with the people who chose to vote. You did what you were supposed to do. My beef is with the folks who had the ability and chose not to.
Can I invite you in, Javon?
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. To follow up on that question as well, like one of the questions I have for you is when it comes to community, like Chandler was saying, like how do we I don't believe we can necessarily convince people to vote a certain way when we can't give when we can't when people don't want to give up their power or being or having that kind of power of being, let's see where to sorry giving up their power that makes a difference. Like I have conversations with it like this with my friends all the time, like, oh, like, one group votes one way, another group votes another. But I have my friends that are white, they'll tell me, oh, like, well, they don't want to be the minority and that's why they're going to vote this way, or they're afraid to vote that way because they're going to lose something if they feel like if they're helping another community out by giving them help. And it's like, well, okay, I can understand that, but then too, like, if you consider yourself an ally, if you say you're a do-gooder, etc., like how could you not,
Yeah, no, I hear you, and it can lead to just exactly where I think you are is frustration, Javon. It's just like, what, how in the can you be here? But ultimately, people are going to vote their interest, and your self-interest is often rooted in fear, fear of a scarcity mentality. That if I give some to him, there won't be some for her, and I get that. We're socialized to be that way. Um, um, yeah, and I don't think that it's an interest. It's an idea of convincing folks to vote one way or voting another way. With this next administration in our country, I think our nation is closer than it has ever been to this experiment of democracy actually breaking. Democracy is an experiment, and it's working okay. But when the experiment was created, it was only created for male landowners in mind. And this is where it got us today. Under a 47 administration, with the people that he's putting into place, the ideologies that they have and carry, and the nationalism and loyalty that they have to him and his principles, this thing could actually break. What does that look like? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we're seeing some of that in Southern California. Government's primary role is to provide safety and security for the people. Is that happening? Has that happened? Will that happen? Think about this. If everybody who was eligible to vote actually showed up and voted, would the system work? I think the system would break.
Mm-hmm.
It can't handle all the folks to vote. So what does a broken democracy look like? It looks like a need to rebuild. right? Yeah, let's
Yeah.
scrap this thing from the beginning. We hate the Electoral College and what it represents. The linkage to the supremacy mentality and trying to minimize Black votes. That's why the Electoral College exists. So when democracy breaks, we're getting rid of it. Why? Because it's a more diversity around the table of creating this thing. Yeah, there are good things about our founding documents, great things about our founding documents that we can build upon, that we can think about in a more equitable and inclusive way. So when I look at where we're headed as a country, I think that like the I liken it to the neighborhood bike and the what do they call them? The husky kids about to hop on the neighborhood bike and break it. Dang, I wanted to ride the bike. He broke it. Well, maybe we get a new bike. Maybe we get a car. We're 16 now. Right? There's other forms of transportation. We can do things differently. We can get rid of the Electoral College. What is the process for that? We go open up a constitutional convention. Now that's a dangerous process, right? Because there's other nasty things that can sneak in to our democracy or change things that are doing good for us now. But you know, if we are now where we are based on the founding documents and the founding fathers' vision of what we would become as a nation, I think it would serve us good to kind of wipe the whiteboard, parking lot some things, and start from scratch.
So in
Sorry,
a
I went
week,
on a brief lecture there.
oh, that's perfect. But in a week, as you mentioned, we're about to inaugurate the 47th president. On that same day, January 20th, it's a celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. So I understand there's a planned demonstration of some sort that is happening. But in your opinion, on January 20th, on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, what would you think Dr. King would think about this climate and this 47th administration? What do you think his impression might be, in your opinion?
For that and more, Clarence, tune in to my keynote address at the city of Oxnard on that morning. No, but realistically, part of what I just said is that, right? It's really reimagining the way that we could be. We are a nation of innovators. Dr. King knew that. Black folks are a lot of what that is. When you look at a lot of, you know, if necessity is the mother of invention, who needed things to work better? The people who were doing the work, right? And so it makes sense that a lot of our inventions in America, at least, came from Black folks. They were the ones in the field that was like, look, we can do this faster if we did this, that, or the other, right? And so I think that there's an understanding of that history that's important. And so like we can't, you know, we could say DEI, whatever, CRT, whatever, but at the end of it, like we need true American history for us to understand where we came from. All of us.
I
But
think
that doesn't erase people's true feelings, right? That doesn't erase the reality of the sense of despair. That doesn't erase or minimize any of those things. Those feelings are real. And I've struggled to come to the point where I am. But part of that without struggle, there's no progress. Frederick Douglass, I believe it was, said. And so, again, we shouldn't run away from the things of discomfort. Yes, we're tired as a nation. We're tired as a people, but we need to persist because if not us, then who? And if not now, when? To quote Dr. King.
yes, but the problem is we're always having the same fight over and over and over and over again, generation after generation after generation.
And you know what? The relief pitcher is always having to come in and close out the game.
Well,
That's his
I'm
job.
waiting for the
I
next
get it.
pitcher to come in because it's getting exhausting. But, you know, I want to look at some of the themes you've explored in Coffee with a Black Guy in the past, and Messy Conversation has addressed reparations on a few occasions. And I know that on at least a couple of your Coffee with a Black Guy, you've been able to address reparations. You've had guests on your panels who were actually commission members for the state of California around reparations. Do you see any further employment of those recommendations that came up out of that commission happening during the next 4 years under this administration? And if so, what you think might be the most realistic steps forward?
So, I mean, thank you for that question, but my answer to that is based on a simple understanding of the legislative process in California. And California, under Governor Newsom's leadership and members of the legislature have said and made it very clear that they're willing to fight the Trump administration on any and everything. California is the state that invents the future. It's the fifth, almost the fourth largest economy in the world. And so that gives, I don't know if anybody plays poker, but that gives you a little bit of some chips on the table to push around your weight, right? And so I think particularly on the reparations issue, it very well may start taking a little bit further backseat to some of the more inclusive policies that we need to fight the Trump administration on. However, I think that a state like California that can invent the future is able of walking and chewing gum at the same time. And so there are a slate of bills that various California state legislators have carried to further advance the issue of reparations that had been studied and recommendations made by a commission. That was done and commissioned based on a legislative process that was approved by the governor. And so I think that an understanding of the legislative process and understanding about policy is that it's about incremental movement. And I don't like that idea, but that is the reality of the system. And so we're going to continue, I believe, and would hope to continue to advance some things on that front to get that in place. One being the recommendation of a Freedmen's Bureau, right? We don't know where we are until we know who we are. And so you can start doing that family research and start to understand who you are and who you are related to and what legacy you carry every day with you in your DNA. I think that's a foundational part of moving this forward as well. Hopefully that answers your question, because I feel like I just kind of started rambling on reparations.
Well, sure. I mean, you have pretty much, I mean, your experience in the California legislature, as well as your involvement with those panelists from the commission, certainly you have the most up-to-date information, and certainly we value your opinion on how that could become a reality or not. But I'd like to invite my cohorts to jump in before we open the room up to our other guests.
James, I'd like to ask you regarding the Caste, Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. Because of the hierarchical caste system, the umbrella of all the isms, what approaches, if any, do you believe should be taken to crack the constructed wall of the caste oppressive colonialism? Now, earlier you said that if we have a broken democracy, what do we need to rebuild it? Based on the definition of what the caste system is, which is throughout the world, how do we go about changing and rebuilding our democracy with the understanding and the ideology of what the caste system is?
Dang, Lisa, that's a deep question. You read the book a couple times, huh?
Yes, and honestly, I specifically read the book for this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And a few years ago, the Arts and Lecture series up at UCSB had Elizabeth Wilkerson as part of their series to talk about her book. And I facilitated a conversation, a Coffee with a Black Guy conversation after that about those topics. And it for me, the caste system support is what holds up capitalism, right? And so, like, yeah, I'm not here to say capitalism is bad. It is what it is, right? It's got its good, it's got its bad. But the reason that we put profits over people is, and the reason how we're able to do that is through the caste system, right? By othering, by that whole concept of supremacy. I'm better than this group, but this group is better than this group, right? And so when you talk about like how do we rebuild with without the concept of or kind of dissolving that concept of the caste system, I mean, as I was hearing your question, all I could think of was the moving forward with the foundational grounding of the Ubuntu principle. I am because we are, right? And when you think about building community in that way, and let's not divorce the reality again. Like we've seen we can do it, right? I've been in Santa Barbara during the Thomas Fire and subsequent debris flow of 2017 and 2018. I see what's happened now in the Pacific Palisades and Altadena and other communities about burning down to the ground, and this whole immediate concept of what we must rebuild, right? And so with that in mind, I think that we already have a model for resiliency on that. We just tend to compartmentalize and not connect the dots because that's too convenient or maybe inconvenient. I wish Al Gore never stole that inconvenient truth phrasing, because there are a lot of inconvenient truths that we end up having to deal with. And so that's my thought process around, immediately around the caste system and what we do with that. But then the reality of it is that I don't really think it's going to disappear. It's aspirational for it to disappear.
Okay, so then we never actually move forward.
Incremental movement, yes, incremental movement forward, right? I think we can dissolve, like when you dissolve something, it's eventually gone. But when you first start to dissolve it, like it still exists. And so I think that it's going to be incremental for us to kind of get out of the reliance on a caste system to support the things that we think are important, which is money.
Would any other cohort members want to contribute to that or to ask a new question before we open up the room?
I wanted to approach and ask James, you brought up resiliency, and you hear a lot about it these days and how to be resilient to the odds that are against us, no matter which group you're a part of. But resiliency has this extremely individual component. It's about finding your own personal strength to overcome said odds in front of you. How can we also use resiliency as a way to build community? Can we do so?
How can we use resiliency as a way to build community? Well, look, resiliency is not new. If you look at, again, let's lean on capitalism. And you look at folks that play the stock market, where they say the best way to protect your assets is diversify your income, diversify your assets. So we can use diversity when it comes to our financial assets, but we can't make the leap and realize that that's going to create resiliency for our lives. The model is there. We just blatantly ignore it. We see what works. We see what doesn't work. And so, yes, resiliency is absolutely a way of building community and building forward, but it'll do it in a diverse way, right? When you look at, and again, I hate to continue to harp on the thing that is the most immediate in front of us, but when you look at the difference in coverage, the difference in treatment, the difference in the empathy gap between Pacific Palisades and Altadena, the predominantly and historically Black community, as opposed to middle class, historically Black community, and Pacific Palisades, a well-to-do celebrity enclave, right? So, and others, like there's working class folks that live there as well, right? But then when you look at what the dominant narrative is of that, it reflects our nation. It reflects our sadly reflects our nation. And social media is playing a role in pointing some of that out, but I don't think that's enough. I think that that's too reactionary to trying to be in, like there's the coming from a person who's a trained journalist, you've got to be able to balance that urgency and accuracy, Social media doesn't do that at all, right? It's about urgency and then the accuracy be damned. And so I think that there's a place for growth for that, but there's a benefit for going in head first with that urgency. Yeah, so I hate to say that, I really do, but it's the reality.
I just have one more question, and
Please.
it's on a lighter note. Who is your favorite author? Why? And have any of the readings profoundly impacted your life? And if so, how?
I mean, the ego in me wants to say that I'm my favorite author about the book that I haven't yet written. However, one that has impacted my life and Nathan McCall makes me want to holler. It was foundational. I read it when I was a young teen, growing up, a young Black boy in a predominantly white community. And when I read that book, I saw myself. I heard myself, and that ignited me into a different realm. Right. What that exactly has been, I'm not sure. But it is that's who stands before you today. And so Nathan McCall's "Make Me Want to Holler" was a very foundational book for me and my development.
And documents offline, James, you mentioned to me to share in our LibGuide. We charge genocide. Would you like to kind of hype us on that a little bit?
Yeah. Let me give you the full name here. 1 second. Okay. Yes. The full name of that document is "We Charge Genocide: The Historic Petition to the United Nations for Relief from a Crime of the United States Governments Against the Negro People." It was authored by the Civil Rights Congress in 1951. It was delivered to the United Nations by a group of Black activists, including but not limited to Paul Robeson, Harry Belafonte, and some others, who were again, the document was delivered to the United Nations, I believe, once in Paris and once again somewhere else, and then it was never responded to until just a few years ago. But it was a document that essentially charges the the United States of genocide against the Negro people, and it documents it throughout history. I read that book or that document. I say I laugh because when I tried to look the book up back in, I believe it was 2015. It had an astronomical price, a 5-digit price on the book. And immediately I said, well, if a book is more than $10,000, what are they hiding in that book? I want to know more. And so I went on a quest to find the context of that book and was able to read it and dissect it. And it's a clear documentation of systematic and intentional efforts to get rid of Black folks in America. The reaction afterwards tells me that it was right. When Paul Robeson was excommunicated from the United States and had to go live in Russia and being accused of being a communist, although he did have communist ties, but when that happened, like that tells me, oh, there's something truthful over in this document. And then the Equal Justice Initiative kind of updated it in 2015. And you can go visit the Equal Justice Initiative, the Brian Stevenson's group, and dig into that updated document. But it details like the absolutely abhorrent actions against Black folks, lynchings, murders, beatings. When you talk about the reason I'm so adamant against the people who didn't vote, is when you read that We Charge Genocide and you hear about the Black veterans who came back to the United States to vote and were beaten and killed, and their families killed in the front of them and tortured. Like, this is all documented. And what about the things that weren't documented, right? The way they were able to do the documentation for We Charge Genocide is culling through old newspaper clippings and things of that nature. But what wasn't covered by the papers in the back sticks of Mississippi, in the streets of Atlanta or Detroit or Baltimore, right?
Thank you for that. We'd like to now open it up to our full body here. I think there might be some comments or some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I did see one from Russell about wanted me to expand a little bit more on DEI as organizational development. I'm not reframing that with my organization. That's always been a part of the framing, right? Is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is really about your organization. It's professional development. Like out of conversations and focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, inevitably, what we hear in working with organizations, whether they be nonprofit, corporations, or otherwise, is that folks have a challenge engaging in difficult conversations, regardless of what they are. Right. And so being able to let folks take what they know and bridge it to what they want to know. Right. What is it that you know? I have difficult conversations talking to my employees about performance reviews. Great. So how does that change based on who you're talking to, what employee you're talking to, and how does your implicit bias connect to how you frame that conversation with each of those individuals, right? And so it really is organizational development. How do you coach people up? How do you allow employees to show up as their whole selves, right? Think about the whole employee and talk about the whole employee concept quite frequently in the work that I'm doing. Wait, what does that have to do with diversity, equity, inclusion? Belonging, inclusion, diversity. The way you show up may be different than the way that person shows up. Even they both may have the same background, but you're going to show up differently. And so allowing folks to show up as who they are. Russell, I hope that addresses that. And if not, please speak up.
That did, James. This is a powerful, powerful day, and Clarence and the whole committee, thank you for making this happen. I do want to just throw out another question to you, though, real quick, and that is, I'm going to ask you to address us as the Academy, right, as a social justice institution, and based on what I was hearing you say earlier about the environment we're walking into coming January 20th. We've already been walking into it, actually. But what's going to happen after January 20th? What thoughts and recommendations do you have for us as an institution? How might we combat or educate or do something differently in the environment that we're walking in? Because some of what I'm feeling is happening here is that there's some miseducation. Not we are educating, right? But there's this miseducation out there in the community with people, and there's more work that we might be able to do as educators. I just wonder if you could share some of your thoughts on that, what we might do as an institution. Thank you.
Man, I struggle to say this, but I'm going to say it. And
say it.
And you may or may not invite me back, but an institutional investment in things like this. This is exactly what will lead us into the future, having and leaning into the uncomfortable, the difficult, and doing it like it's an I wrote down when Clarence was giving the introduction here, right, about the work that Messy Conversations was doing in the planning committee, and I was like, there's an oxymoron there. You don't plan something messy, right? But at the same time, you have to plan something messy. And so with the same concept that you've been able to plan a series called Messy Conversations and lean into that difficultness and that uncomfortability, you need to be able to plan leaning into the difficult. Like for a lot of organizations, nonprofits, they're looking at budget cuts, 15 to 20% budget cuts under the new administration because of the rhetoric of mouth flapping that's been happening at the political level, right? And so with educational institutions, it's about really really leaning into that concept of education and not indoctrination, right? Give folks a platform to explore their curiosity in a developmental way. And I think education is a perfect vehicle for that. But also conversation is essential, right? Education, I'm thinking in my mind, is being something that delivers a curriculum, has a research and all that stuff behind it. But I think the importance of the conversation is folks need an opportunity to unpack that thing that they're digesting, right? When you digest something, you got to chew on it. And sometimes chewing on it means talking about it in community and talking your ideas out in a safe and developmental way. And so I think it's a more than just a one-prong approach. But thank you for that great question, Russell.
Thank you for that.
I'm going to steal a comment I heard by two anchor people recently. They were talking about messy conversations being had, and they said, let's get messy with a message. And I think that we want to carry out in Messy Conversations. And I know you do that in Coffee with a Black Guy, but we want to do more messiness with a message. But I see Clara's hand up, and there might be other hands that I can't see. So Sarah or David, could you help me out with that?
Well, let me just jump in. I was going to call on Clara. We are coming up on 5 o'clock, which is our official ending time, but is our habit. We usually continue on for another 10, 15, 20 minutes in a more informal way. So we encourage you to stay if you can. If you have to go, come back in 2 weeks. We're off next week due to the holiday. When we have a conversation about mutual aid networks, should be a terrific conversation. And with that, Clara, your question, comment?
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, James. It's been really great listening to this, and I feel like I'm learning a lot. I wanted to tie together two things that came up. You said when you were talking about voting that interests are based on people's fears a lot of the time. People's interests are based on their fears. And then you've also been this theme of incremental change. It can happen. And if we can take those little steps. I'm curious if you want to speak to making incremental change to change the fears that cause racism, prejudice. And I was wondering if you have any personal experience in your one-on-one interactions and conversations with people. Where is there hope? Can we incrementally change people's minds?
Wow, Clara, you're connecting dots that I really appreciate. So as part of that concept of incremental change is also the pendulum swing. And you may hear politicians talk about that quite frequently, as sometimes the pendulum swings a bit to the left and it swings back to the right. And each time it swings, it loses a little bit of momentum, right? And then it's eventually going to settle somewhere in the middle where most people are, right? And so my thought process on can folks actually change in an incremental way? Yes. Is it more likely to happen in a more drastic and severe way? Absolutely. And so the racist grandfather gets in a car accident and is stranded on the side of the road. The first person to come to his aid is a Black woman who just got off of work and has her 2 kids in the back seat. And all of a sudden, that experience allows it to be okay. to have that connection, right? And so that's the drastic form of it. The incremental swing would be grandpa stays in his house, continues to watch Fox News, continues to divide, only pays attention to the things in his listening tank. Then all of a sudden, grandkid comes in and wants to have an interracial relationship, and grandpa's uncomfortable with it. Grandkid goes back. Next time grandkid comes, he's engaged, and then and then it's that incremental. Okay, I guess I got to accept it now or not, right? But that's the way incrementally that can happen versus more drastically. In the work that I have with folks, one of the challenges that I have in doing this work, and it's an internal challenge, is that a lot of it is self-selected individuals, right? I'm not talking to Racist Cop 101. That like they're not showing up to a conversation called Coffee with the Black Guy. They're probably not showing up to Coffee with the Cop. But those are the people who I want to engage. Those are the folks that I believe are able to see growth. But at the same time, this concept of liberal politeness, of anti-racism, is also dangerous, right? And so I'm willing to and have worked with all, and I think that there's growth with all. That growth is not my responsibility. All I do is plant the seed. And I think of it, and I love this concept of like, we love to give flowers to people, right? There's this whole new, like, I don't know if it's new, but like give people their flowers when they can still smell them. And then this concept of actually giving flowers to people. And we love that end result, but understand that that flower had to take a journey to get to that beautiful thing that we appreciate. And I think we, again, looking into nature as our blueprint to where we belong to be, can do the same. With all due respect to time, hopefully, if I can go into that a little bit.
Thank you so much.
There was someone else, right, David?
Yeah, Derek.
I just unmuted myself. I'm muting myself again. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, I'm at the Santa Barbara City campus, and I've actually come back. James, Clarence, everyone on the panel, I really appreciate all the topics you've brought up. I'm actually in my second quarter in the graduate program for the clinical psychology program. I'm the only African American, by the way, in that program in my cohort, but it's not unusual for me to see something like that. We do need more of us there. I'm actually coming back to Santa Barbara City College after 20 years. I was the director of the international program back in the late 90s. And it's interesting you talk about difficult conversations, and you also mentioned things that having to do with exposure. We had a group of professional Black males in Santa Barbara in the late 90s. We were called the Brotherhood. And I don't know if you knew Michael Young, who was the chancellor, David Stone, who was on the campus, Keith Marshall, who did hair in the community. Whole group of us, we got together, and we also talked about a lot of the things that you're addressing, about kind of giving people more exposure in Santa Barbara to us. We're all professionals, so we figured we could go out there. And we worked in senior centers. We put on events. We joined a lot of people together just so they have a little bit more exposure to us. But you've talked about a lot of really deep issues, and I also think I have a really good book in me too, James. And I think it's gonna come out really well when I can finally get to it. But when we talk about DEI, it's sad. You guys have just been hearing recently that Walmart, Meta, they're all like pulling back on it. And I've talked to people about this as I was studying diversity, equity, and inclusion. Belonging is really the one that stands out to me, because there's just a lot of situations. When I started at Santa Barbara City College, there was only a handful of us managers, and we all kind of stuck together and we talked about the issues. And now, I don't know if you know, but on Santa Barbara City College campus, there is the BFSA, the Black Faculty Association. So we do have a group, and there's about 20 of us on campus now, that we talk about. They're going to have actually a Black grad ceremony They started it some years ago, but they're bringing in the whole Carpinteria, all the communities. For those of you that know Santa Barbara, so there is some work being done. But I did want to talk about what Clarence said. You know, I am also getting pretty exhausted with the efforts, and we can't stop. But when I saw that DEI was just going away, gone, and I talked to my friends who of multiple colors and groups and religions and backgrounds, and people just feel some guilt about it when you discuss it. They just, when you bring it into certain corporations, even into institutions, you hear people say, you know, I think I'm doing the right thing. Is I don't understand why we have to look at this and do things differently. You know, I'm not a racist. I mean, you know, I've got Black friends, you hear that a lot, but people feel uncomfortable, and then they have guilt. And whenever they have guilt, there's some avoidance and some, I've got to do more work when I'm not that person. It's somebody else. So there's just a lot going on here. And I know it's too much to talk about it at this time, but it is exhausting because we're trying all these different things, and then we get the results with the election. And I can tell you that all the Black folks that I know, they feel unsafe. I have friends who are Latinos in the Hispanic community. They're green card holders, and they want to run scared. You know, these types of things that are happening, it's just like we're, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know, it's exhausting. And I'm sorry, I'm going on and on about this, but I'm going to bring up one other thing about reparations. My father and his platoon in Vietnam was on the front lines, doused with Agent Orange. And they talk about reparation. You talk about people coming back. These Black folks came back, and they're all Black platoons, doused with Agent Orange. Have you heard anything about that? You know, we talk about reparations. We talk about the U.S. government. We talk about us fighting for our country. And then you don't hear anything even about that. My father died as a result to that type of thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to stay positive, and I'm working towards all these positive, you know, and working with these groups, but it's exhausting, like Clarence said. So I'll ask you, James, I know you're optimistic, I can tell, but you got to keep throwing it out there for us, because I'm telling you, I'm getting exhausted.
Yeah, it is very exhausting. And I can share with you what I lean on as far as dealing with exhaustion, but also you kind of took me off track there with the thought process on Agent Orange. My father was also a Marine and who served during Vietnam in the combat areas, and I was he's still alive, but I have a 1.5-year-old daughter, and she likes to put her feet.
So sorry to hit that point. I'm sorry.
She likes to put her feet in my shoes. And I remember feeling joyful that I didn't have to stop her, because when I was a kid and had to do that to my dad's shoes, I was reprimanded for, get your feet out of there. Something about Agent Orange. Now that sounded attractive to me. Who's this agent you talking about? Agent who? Now we know we don't want Agent Orange, but at the same time, like the being able to reflect on that as a difference that a generation can make, but then also the impact that a generation could make. My initial instinct to my daughter when I saw her putting her feet in my shoes was, don't do that. I had to stop myself to do that. Breaking that generational curse that could have easily continued on. Simple example of something, very simple example. The exhaustion, I mean, it's real. I had the fortune of having some exposure to some developmental training that I rely on for that. One being a simple poem. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will. When the road you're trudging seems all uphill. When funds are low and debt is high. When you want to smile, but you have to sigh. When care is pressing you down a bit. Rest if you must, but don't you quit. That poem goes on to give more inspiration behind how not to quit, but the reality of it is life sucks. It's not fun. Paying bills isn't fun. Raising kids, yes, it's fun, but it's a lot of work, right? Going up, getting up, going, leaving your house that you pay rent or mortgage on to go to a place and then come back 6 or 8 hours later and then spend a couple hours before you go to like that process. There's something flawed with it. That's not fun. So do we just end it all? No. You take a rest. You breathe when you're exhausted. You lean on community for support. You do what you need to do to take care of yourself, and then you continue on with the knowledge that that pain and strife gave you. Yes, absolutely, it's exhausting, and it's not for everyone. But those of us who are willing are here to do the work and keep it going. If you're exhausted, point to those of us who are doing it. You ain't heavy, you're my brother. I'm not facilitating, but Lisa, I see your hand.
Thank you. A question just popped in my head of what you just said about the shoes, between your father's shoes and your shoes. In Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between Me and the World, he wrote a letter to his son. I know we you can't compose a letter right now, but in a couple of sentences, what would your letter look like to your daughter?
I wouldn't write it until after the 20th. Too much is going to change, right? Like, particularly as a young woman in this world, looking at the things that we're looking at, and the blatant and abject misogyny, and again rooted in fear. I'd be at a loss right now because of that uncertainty, but hoping things become a little bit more clear and certain, in the weeks to come, whatever that may look like. But again, like when the neighborhood bike broke, the end of that story is when I turned 16, my dad bought me one of them 16-wheelers. Wait a minute. That I was really excited. It was shiny blue, one of them fancy mountain bikes. And then when I turned 17, I looked back on it and thought, he got me a bike instead of getting me a car. That sucker got off easy, right? So understand that once something breaks, we can go to something new, but make sure it's the thing that we deserve and not the thing that's just given to us.
Well, James, you made out better than me. On my 16th birthday, I thought I was getting a car, and I got a little glass car-shaped decanter instead. But looking at your poem that you just shared with us, it reminds me a lot of Langston Hughes's A Mother to Son, Life in Me Ain't Been No Crystal Stair.
Mm-hmm.
But are there other questions? Hands up. I can't see from my screen, folks, so please help us out. Chandler.
I had one last one. For like educational institutions, K through 12 and higher education, how can we better lobby for making sure, like, African American studies is like a requirement as opposed to just an elective? Like we see like a lot of, like states like Florida are like taking that away, but like implementing every other culture to be able to learn about that, but not African American diaspora culture, anything like that. Like even being a student here at Antioch, like I feel like Dr. Gill's class, like I love her so much. She's done so much for me. I've learned even more, in all my education, just sitting in her class and talking to her. Like, how can we get her class to be, like classes like hers to be more of a requirement before you move on to, move on up and move into other fields?
Yeah. That would make the world a better place, wouldn't it? So I think I would like to differentiate between policy and practice. Having the policies in place, the policies are in place, right? In California, at least, like we have ethnic studies curriculum, all this kind of stuff. The practice is not there. And what I see, is, particularly in my work with the K-12 system, is that uh, it's rooted in a lack of professional development and a commitment to that. And so when you talk about organizational development, professional development is organizational development, right? And when you have teachers who mean well but don't have the skill set to deliver on ethnic studies, on a diversified curriculum, if all they're doing is quoting Dr. King and they're not going deeper down into the diaspora, then they're doing a disservice to our communities. And so I think that an intentional and strategic focus on development of our educators, whether that be our graduate schools of education, or not either or, but continued professional development on those issues. Once you're in the profession, you have certain professions that require continuing education credits. If there's a way to ensure that there is a diversity focus on that, and when I say a diversity focus, diversity, equity, inclusion should not be something separate. It's a lens that you develop, that you look through all your work. Infuse it into what it is you do, develop that lens, and then you march forward. And so I think that again, there are policies in place that could be actualized upon, but the practice needs to really be beefed up around the professional development and the proficiency of educators to address those issues.
And those are great words for the state of California, but that may not hold up in Mississippi and Alabama, where they're threatening teachers and they're banning books and they're making it, unlawful for people to teach real history. Javon, is
Yes.
speaking of the relevance of Dr. Elaine Parker Gills's class, which, I hang on to every sentence that she has to offer, because it goes beyond wisdom. Antioch should be applauding, a class like Elaine Parker Gills's, and it should always be in the curriculum, but it's not. And there are lots of reasons, I guess, for that. But in a place that our DEI officer, Stephanie Helms Pickett, is in, she's in North Carolina. So North Carolina may not be as threatened as, say, Alabama or Florida, but there's so many teachers right now who are living in fear because they want to teach the truth, they want to teach the history, but they also are fearful of their jobs. So that's where the practice part is coming in. And I really think we should go back to those freedom schools. And if this Freedom Bureau in California is doing something other than financial, maybe they can spun, the need, or at least the access to the genesis of some freedom schools on Saturdays, just like my Jewish brothers and sisters. They will have, the Hebrew schools for their children on weekends sometimes. And, we may have to get down to that. It may have to become just that simplified.
Well, again, in policy, like that is part of the recommendations from the commission the Reparations Commission in California, is that it's not about just a check, right? It's about, I believe there's a 7-point system for reparations, maybe 5. I can't recall the exact number, but I do know that one of those components is education. And so there needs to be an educational component that goes along with that whole concept of reparations. And it's I refuse to think of it as all doom and gloom, right? We're an innovative people. And when I say we, I talk about Americans. We're an innovative people. If they're saying that we can't teach it in schools, well, where do kids spend the rest of their time? On video games or on social media. So what we've seen is the proliferation of educators going to social media to provide that kind of education, particularly TikTok, which is also being threatened, right? And so there's been commitments from organizations like some of the Black Greek letter organizations. I know specifically Omega Psi Phi, my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, has also made a commitment to making sure that education is a part of our community commitment. It takes a village, not just a school, but it takes a village. And so if the schools aren't teaching it, Sunday schools need to teach that. After school programs need to teach that. Parents need to step up and teach that, right? It's gonna be incumbent upon all of us as a community to fill in those voids in the states such as North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi that don't do things, and also recognize the things that those states do well. Mississippi and its education of students with disabilities, right? They can focus on that and do a good job with that.
James, just wanted to harken back to something that Javon I saw reposted in our chat log and everything like that. As an Indigenous person, I'm also wanting to know, how can non-Black, Indigenous, other people of color show up for Black people, especially coming the 20th is a week away? How can we show up and be open to our Black brothers and sisters?
The Black Panther Party became a danger when they joined the Rainbow Coalition. There's power in unity. We got to take care of our own. We've got to focus on our own, and we've got our own thing. Each individual group, right? You need that concept of affinity groups when you're talking about in the corporate structure. You need to have your affinity group cook up the things that you need, but then have a subcommittee of that affinity group be that reach out and connect to the others. It's like, hey, we're talking about this. Hey, we're talking about this. Sharing resources, sharing strategy. Those kind of things are absolutely important, incumbent upon us to move forward incrementally. And again, there's a model for it as far as that. The danger that I have with that is what we see is the oppression Olympics, right? We got to steer away from that when we're building coalitions and we're doing collaborative work. Life it sucks for everyone. Right? Your suck is different than mine, but it sucks. We got to find the light in that, right? There's beauty in us resigning to that and saying, okay, but we're going to move forward. And so really giving Black folks and other folks space to cook on their own, and then ask them where they need support, right? You know, there was that when during the first Trump election, when the Women's March came up and everyone started knitting pussy hats, who decided that was a thing, right? Somebody somewhere had that idea, and then all of a sudden it proliferated. Well, just as beautifully, we can figure other things out that need to proliferate through our community and not use WhatsApp to do it because the CIA is listening.
So I am conscious of the time, and we've impinged upon your generosity and good graces, and we don't want to overdo that because I think we'd like to have you back at some point, James. Really grateful for the conversation, for everybody's participation. Remember that we're not having Messy next week because of the holiday. We'll be back on, I think the 27th, something like that, for mutual aid network conversation. Hope to see you here. It's going to be a very special Messy because it's going to be a 2-for-1 Messy. So you can bring a friend for the same price, get in. So invite somebody and let's get this conversation bigger, bolder, messier. And before we go, show some love to James and our panelists.
Yay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Indeed. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you, James.
Really grateful.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.